Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for the 10th inning with Nick Mattos.
Oh, put me in cold. I'm ready to play today. Put me in cold. I'm ready to play today. Look at me. I can be center field.
Welcome to the 10th inning. I'm Nick Mattos in the Lethal Weapon 2 studios with my producer Dave Perkins. And joining me today on the 10th inning is a good friend of mine, my funk soul brother, Jerry Robinson. Jerry, thanks for joining me today.
My funk. What's up, my soul brother? Hey, man, it's always a pleasure to be here. I'm ready to roll when you're ready to roll, buddy.
Yeah, we're going to roll today, Jerry. I was watching the first game of the Western Conference Championship Series there between the Golden State Warriors and the San Antonio Spurs. And the Spurs came right out in the first quarter and put up 33-16 lead on the Golden State Warriors. The Warriors, though, battled back in the second half after coming back from a 25-point deficit. They came back and defeated the Spurs in Game 1, 113-111. And that historical comeback, Jerry, ignited some memories for me about incredible historic comebacks that I've been able to witness in my life. And I started thinking about a lot of them. And the first one that came to my mind was the Super Bowl. And I want to talk to you about all the incredible comebacks that I've witnessed. And I'm sure you've seen some of them too, Jerry. But let's start with the Golden State Warriors, because they are red hot right now. And that day against the San Antonio Spurs, they had gotten behind by 25 points early in the second quarter. And the Warriors mounted that furious comeback that I mentioned, but it also may have been aided by an injury from their star player, Kawhi Leonard. Did you think that was the pivotal point in that game, Jerry, when Kawhi went down? The Warriors had cut the lead. I think they were down by about 10 or 12 when Kawhi left the game early in the third quarter. And after that, the Spurs just did not mount any kind of a fight, and the Warriors put them away and won that game 113-111. Was that the collapse that happened there for San Antonio? Was the loss of Kawhi Leonard in that first game?
Well, I think so. When you lose your leader, and Kawhi's the leader of that San Antonio Spurs basketball team. When you lose that spark plug, for instance, here you go. It'd be like losing Draymond Green. You know what I mean? It'd be like Draymond. It'd be like that. You know, Draymond, I look at him like, I call him the night rider. That's the dude you want to ride with any time of the night, any neighborhood you want to go into. That's the dude you want to have with you. And with Kawhi, he went down, and like you said, the Warriors, they were mounting their comeback, but boy, I tell you what, it was like a shot of adrenaline, everything after Kawhi went out, and the Warriors just took over, and they haven't looked back since. But yeah, I know that was a big part of that comeback. The Warriors played fantastic. I mean, comebacks are interesting. You have to be allowed to come back. And they were able to come back. And with the injury to Kawhi, they were allowed to come back. And once they just started clicking on all cylinders, and that's all over. I mean, when the Warriors when they're on, they're on. I mean, they're dangerous. You got three sharpshooters, and you also got, like I said, the night rider in green with Draymond. They could smell it. They could feel it. That old saying, the momentum shifted. Well, it definitely shifted when Kawhi got hurt.
Yeah, that's a great nickname you've got for Draymond Green. I love that, the Night Rider. No, that's good. I'm going to use that one if you don't mind. And you mentioned something. I
don't mind.
Yeah, you mentioned something I think is, and I thought a lot about this, Jerry, about great comebacks, historic comebacks. But they also, if you're going to have an historic comeback, you're going to need a collapse by the team that you're playing against. And in that game, it may not have been a collapse by the team. It was a collapse when Kawhi Leonard went out of the game. But when I'm thinking back about the historical comebacks that I've witnessed, most every one of them involves the other team collapsing in some way. If it's not play calling, if it's not their defense, if it's not their offense kind of hitting a wall and not being able to put up any more points. And I believe that you cannot have an incredible comeback unless you get opponent to collapse in some way. And sure enough, Jerry, that was the second game in a row. The Warriors on March 29th, the last regular season game of the season against San Antonio. It was the last game they played them. It was in San Antonio. And the Warriors in that game, playing without Kevin Durant, had dropped behind by 21 points. And I thought to myself during that game, there was no way the Warriors could make a comeback. Without Kevin Durant, 21 points down in San Antonio. San Antonio was playing really well. They had Kawhi Leonard in that game. But the Warriors staged an unbelievable comeback in that game and defeated the Spurs 110-98. And I thought to myself, okay, now they've done it 2 times in a row. They did it the last regular season game. They come back on Mother's Day by 25 points and do it again. There's no way that San Antonio's the psychological advantage that the Warriors have now over San Antonio is too huge. The Warriors went on, destroyed San Antonio in Game 2. It was just a blowout, and 136-100 in that game. And then I think it was Saturday night, the Warriors defeated San Antonio to take a 3-0 lead and a stranglehold in the series. They defeated them 120-108. No team has ever come back from a 3-0 deficit in the NBA playoffs. There's been 125 series that have gone 3-0, and each time the team's gone down 3-0, they've been eliminated. So the Warriors are going to play tonight, at 6 o'clock, Jerry, and hopefully they're going to close it out. But I just started thinking about incredible comebacks, Jerry, and the Warriors are playing so well right now. 26 out of their wins out of their last 27, and just everybody's producing. And earlier in the season, Jerry, we saw Kevin Durant got injured, and that was the setback for the Warriors. But it turned out to be the setup, and you and I talked about that setup, and I thought your opinion on what that setup did was spot on. Can you tell us what that injury early in the season did for the Warriors for their other players?
What it did, it allowed the other players, the bench players, and the other players that were in role-playing spots, they all have to move up a slot, and they had an opportunity to gain confidence. You know, when you play together with people, you know each other's habits, and that's what happened. They had a chance. They hit it didn't work out right away. I mean, I think they had 3 games that they lost or something like that happened.
Yes, you're exactly right, Jerry.
Shocking everybody. But what that was just that feeling out period. I mean, because you can tell now, I mean, the Warriors, you can plug anybody in right now. And that's because they have confidence in each other. And when you're playing on the Warriors, man, most times when you're watching the basketball game, it seems like some players may not think that they're going to get the ball, but when you're playing with the Warriors, if you're on the court, if you're hustling, you're going to get the ball. You might come from a corner, it might come from the top, it might come behind the head, it might come between somebody's legs, but if you're playing hard, those ball players get each other the ball. I mean, like you said, their assists. I mean, Jesus Christ, the things that they do for each other. That, to me, when you have a team that believes in getting an assist, most people are concerned about getting points. Well, the Warriors seem to thrive on making assists because that means they're playing as a team. And this Warrior team, like we go back to when KD went down, man, they became a stronger and a closer and a better team. Now that psychological advantage, oh yes, when the Warriors, as you had just laid out, they definitely have a psychological advantage over San Antonio. Matter of fact, they have it over everybody in the league. I think the Warriors, by that, what they've been able to do to San Antonio, it's a warning shot for the rest of the people.
Well,
who's coming
Jerry,
down.
that's interesting. That is interesting that you said that. I'm going to interrupt you right there because you think Cleveland Cavaliers do you think they're going to be, the Warriors have a psychological advantage over the Cavaliers? Do you think that?
No, I think that the Warriors think they do. That's all that matters.
Okay.
What do you think as a team? I don't think so. I think, this is going to be a battle. It's going to be a battle, Cleveland and Golden State. The Warriors, it's going to be a battle. But you know what? They picked up KD during the offseason. They already should be feeling psychologically and emotionally better. And guess what? It has panned out. I mean, it has paid dividends upon dividends and dividends having KD out there. And you know what? They're looking at that revenge factor. You know, they're hoping, I'm sure everybody that loves basketball hoping that there's no one that's injured going into this finals, because it's going to be Cleveland and Golden State. Well, I don't want anybody having excuses. I just want everybody, yes.
Amen to that. Amen. I agree with you 100%. And the NBA is going to do everything they can, Jerry, to make sure that both teams are healthy. We looked at the first game is scheduled for the NBA Finals is going to be June 1st. No matter what happens, if the Warriors close out San Antonio tonight, and I thought it was a huge upset last night that Cleveland lost to Boston last night. I figured that was going to go 3-0, but it's 2-1 now, and that's good for Boston because they looked so pitiful in the first two games of that series, and they came back last night without Isaiah Thomas and did a very good job of competing. And for the first time in I don't know when, LeBron James looked like he was over the hill. And I know he's not, don't get me wrong, but in that game last night, LeBron James showed his age. For the very first time, he was 0 for 6 in the last quarter of the game. He only scored 11 points. He just looked really out of sync last night. And I know that's not LeBron James. I believe LeBron James is the most valuable player in the NBA. And I truly believe that for his team, when he's not in there, the Cleveland Cavaliers are not any kind of a team without him. And he showed that. He's just a great player, Jerry. Yeah. But, you know, Jerry, I think this is the great thing about the NBA. Every night when you get to a game, we've seen some teams that are far behind and they come back, and we've seen the Warriors come back several times. They haven't always been the front runner. They've come behind several times in other games, not just this last game against the San Antonio Spurs in that first game. But you know, I was looking into the greatest comeback in NBA regular season history, and I thought, wow, how much could it be? The Warriors came back from 25, and sure enough, Jerry, the greatest comeback in the NBA happened on November 27th, 1996. The Utah Jazz, led by Karl Malone and John Stockton, were down at halftime, 70-36 to the Denver Nuggets. And they turned it around in the second half, and it was 70-36. And Denver scored the first basket of the second half to go up by 36 points. From then on out, it was all Utah Jazz and the mailman, Karl Malone. They ended up coming back and defeating Denver 107-103 for the largest deficit ever made up in an NBA basketball game. And I thought to myself, wow, the mailman. What do you know? What do you know about Karl Malone, the mailman? I mean, he was a legend, wasn't he?
Yeah, well, he definitely delivered. Put it that way. The mail was always delivered, no matter what. And what you were just talking about too. You know, the interesting thing about those comebacks like that, especially basketball, they go on these streaks, they go on these runs, and you know what? You never know when a run is going to happen. But usually, a run on a 12-0 or 20-0 or whatever it may be, it happens in basketball, and you know. Every team has to go through that, and I think that's what's exciting about basketball. That's why I won't turn off a game or change the channel because somebody's winning by 10 or 15 or 20 points, because I'm sitting there to watch, because all kind of things can happen. You can get somebody into foul trouble. All of a sudden, you can start hitting threes. You can start shooting three-pointers and getting fouled, getting a four-point opportunity. There's so many things that can happen in basketball. People be crazy to change the channel because, especially now, you never know what could happen, because like you said, I mean, especially this year, there have been so many teams come back from behind. You know, some teams have come back and then the other ones have collapsed.
Yeah. Well, Jerry, let's talk a little bit more about the other side of this comeback, okay? You know, when a team comes back, and we've seen the Golden State Warriors, and you just mentioned several reasons why teams come back, Jerry. They get hot, they're getting momentum, they hit three-pointers. But again, on the other side, the other team kind of helps that comeback. They start being inept on offense. They're not stops on defense. Their coaches are making mistakes. And I want to bring this back to a personal level to you. when you were in high school and you were playing high school, you're a great athlete, Jerry. You played 13 years of professional football, 7 years with the LA Raiders. Your first 6 years you were with the Philadelphia Eagles. You were the 20th pick in the first round by the Philadelphia Eagles. I mean, you've had a lot of success in your sports career. But why don't you tell us about some time, because you're a human being and we've all had these times that were tough. Do you remember a time in maybe high school where you didn't come through, Jerry, and you knew that, you know what, you might have cost your team the game?
Yeah, there's always, those are the ones that I think about the most, the ones that got away, and I just, I'm 60 years old now, man. I remember back in 1974 when I was playing high school basketball. We were playing for the championship against Angley High School Tigers. I'm at the free throw line. I was a poor free throw shooter, but anyway, I had a chance to win the game. Didn't make the free throws. Game goes in overtime. I'm put back in that same situation again to win the game in overtime to become a champion again for our basketball team. And I missed the free throw. We lose the game. We don't lose the championship, but we become co-champions. And it's something that I'll never forget. I just, how horrible I felt, I felt like I let everybody down. And it is, like I said, that was many, many years ago. And I do remember that happening to me. But I also remember after that game, though, I was like, I know what it felt like because we had won the championship before. And I've been on the majority of the time on the positive side of that.
Yes.
And I just remember how excited I was actually for them guys. I was happy for them. I was sad for us, especially, I was really down on myself. And I just, after the game, Nick, I just walked into the Angley High School, the basketball team's locker room, and I just congratulated the guys and told them, hey, man, great job, and you guys just deserved it. So, it was one of those days, and later on in life, I had a chance to run into the head coach of that basketball team at the airport, and he was telling me, he said, Jerry, he said, wow, man, he said, you know what I remember about you? And I was like, oh, what am I going to hear now? Lord have mercy. Was he going to remind me of that missed free throw? He said, you know what? After that game, though, after the game that you did miss the free throw and we happened to win the game, he said, I remember you walking into our locker room and congratulating everybody on our team. He said, I've never seen anything like it in my life. And I said, you know what? That's just part of just the sportsmanship that I learned, years ago when I was a young kid. There was a radio show, a sportscaster named Sam Skinner on KDIA radio, and he always used to say, I remember when I was like 6 or 7 years old, he would always end his broadcast with, if you can't be a good sport, don't play. And Nick, from childhood to even now, I've always remembered that. My mom and dad were telling me, you know what, if you can't be a good sport, if you can't go shake somebody's hand after a loss, then you don't need to be playing. So anyway, that was one of the things I remembered about
Jerry,
that. So yeah, that was one of those letdowns.
Yeah, Jerry, listen, that was very powerful right there. I'm not kidding you. I really felt that, and I'm glad you shared that with us and the listeners there, Jerry, because obviously that's a personal thing that was tough, and we know now that what happens in the NBA, they started when Shaquille O'Neal came into the NBA there, he was a big, strong center and had his way under the basket, but he couldn't shoot free throws either. So after a while, the NBA got the idea of fouling him and putting him on the free throw line where he would be lucky if he made one out of the two, and they started calling that Hack-a-Shack, okay? So now we really know where it was Hack-a-Jerry, Hack-JR, okay? That's where this all originated from, okay? But you know what? That was a great story right there, and I really liked the idea that Skinner came up with. If you can't be a good sport, don't play. And that Jerry, you were obviously, and this is the truth, you're the greatest athlete that's ever resided in Sonoma County, all-around athlete. You ran track. You have track records at Cardinal Newman. You're football, you went on to play 4 years at UCLA. You're inducted in the Hall of Fame for UCLA for their football program. And you played basketball for Cardinal Newman, and you were 6'3" center that could do it all, Jerry, okay? I mean, absolutely, it's such a privilege and my pleasure to have you on the 10th inning. And it reminds me of something that you told me about, and I want you to share this with our listeners because we just talked about something that was basically Jerry lost the game for his team. He couldn't hit a free throw at the end of the game. He couldn't hit one in overtime, but he showed what a man he was. And you were a man amongst boys, obviously, Jerry. But you did something that I think I want to let the listeners know about that track meet that you had at El Molino High School, because this is the exact opposite end. Somebody that ran track but had never done a field event called the high jump. Can you share that story with our listeners, Jerry? Because I really think it's a great story.
I sure will. It was a track meet against El Molino High School, and I won the 100-yard dash, I won the 220, and I'd won the long jump, and I was done for the day. And
that was your three events. That was your normal three events for the day.
That was it.
Yeah.
That was it. And my track coach came over, Coach Gasparini came over and said, "Hey, Jerry," he said, "you know what?" He said, Have you ever high jumped before?" I'm like, "No, I've never high jumped before." I said, "Why?" He said, "You know what?" He said, "We're all tied up right here right now. And you know what? If you just go over and just high jump, said all you have to do is finish third and we can win this track meet." I said, "But I've never high jumped before." So anyway, long story short, I used to watch, people high jump at the Fosbury flop and all that kind of stuff, and the scissors and this kind of thing. So I went over there, and the first attempt I had at the high jump. Now listen, the track meet is over. Everybody's gathered around the high jump pit, and I'm staring at this bar over there, and it's my turn, and I start and I approach, and I.
What was the bar was set at 6'5" on your first jump? That's
you know what? I don't even. You know what, Nick? Honestly, I don't know if it was set there. I just know that's where. I do remember that's where it ended up. That's a good point. No, it probably started lower, but it don't matter because when it got to 6'5", I cleared it. Nobody else could, and we won the track meet. And so that was a pretty interesting story right there to tell.
Jerry, I'm sorry to interrupt that, but that, and remember, you were only 6'3", so you high jumped 2 inches taller than when you were looking up at the bar. Yeah. You were looking up at the bar.
Yeah. Well, Nick, but the thing of it is, and the reason I did it was because, Coach asked me to do it. I've never done it before, and it's like this. I'm always a team player. I really believe, that you got to do whatever you got to do. You got to make
whatever your coach asks you to do. Whatever the coach asks you to do, you do. That's what a team player does. Whether it's like you mentioned this earlier about how the Warriors pass the ball. That is a team sport, and that's a team concept. You watch other NBA teams, Jerry. They don't get 30 assists a game like the Warriors did. They set records for assists because they get a lot of gratification from passing the ball to the open player. And you know what this reminds me of a lot is your goddaughter, Maya Flores, and their Cardinal Newman girls basketball team. The more I watched them, Jerry, the more I saw the Golden State Warriors in the Cardinal Newman Cardinals girls basketball team. They passed that extra pass. They made that extra pass to find the open player that would get an open shot, and they would bury those shots. And it was just so fun to watch the girls play because they have
you know what, Nick? You know what, Nick? But no, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but you know what? You got me thinking about how they're not selfish. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
They that extra pass means something to them, and that's why they were able to once again dominate their league play. And for the first time in history around here, they went to the Open Division, and they lost to the number one team ranked in the United States of America, Archbishop Mitty. But anyway, that's what they do. That's how they play. It's not about you. It's not about the name on the back. It's about the name that's on the front, which says Cardinal Newman on the front.
Yeah.
And that's the way they've learned. That's how I learned it too, Nick. I mean, I feel very grateful and fortunate to be able to have gone to a high school that taught things about, respect and techniques and fundamentals and being a good sports about thing and understanding that, we're all in this together, and there's no one that's better than someone else. Someone might get the headlines and this and that, but no one is any better than anybody else. And so it's continuing to be the same way at Cardinal with the girls basketball program.
Yeah, and Jerry, you're spot on. It's all about being unselfish, and you just don't see that enough these days in professional sports, especially. I mean, remember every player, Jerry, and you know you're a special player. But when you got on your team in the Philadelphia Eagles, they had Bill Bergey as the middle linebacker, and you were sitting back there watching Bill Bergey, and he was a legend at that time, and he probably weighed 240, 250, and you were 213, 215. I don't know. You told me before, and I forget every time, but you were certainly not that big of a guy. And sure enough, Bill Bergey goes down. You take over in the middle linebacker position and never relinquish that position again. I mean, that was just an unbelievable story right there, you know, that you would be able to do that and take over for a legend like Bill Bergey, who certainly a Hall of Fame type player, wasn't he?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And actually, he was about 255, 260. We called him Bubba. He was a big dude.
Yes,
man.
he was. Yes,
and
solid.
And when he went down, I tell kids, I speak to different groups of kids, no matter what school it is, what sport it is, and let them know that, one of the most important things you can do if you're not starting, if you're not playing, is making sure you're watching what that person in front of you is doing. You need to know what you're supposed to do, because when and if that opportunity comes, you got to take advantage of it. My situation, I was very fortunate. I was able to, when my number was called, it was just like stepping up, next man up, just like the Warriors, man. KD goes down, the other guys get a chance to play. So anyway, I had my opportunity, and thank God I was prepared for it. But I'd been preparing for it since I was playing more like high school football. Because Pop Warner, I really didn't even like football. I just was out there because my brother and everybody else was playing. It was something to do, and so I learned a long time ago. If you have the proper techniques and the proper fundamentals, and like you said, I was like 212, 218 pounds. The most I ever weighed in the NFL was about 220 something. And I'll always, every Sunday, and even during practice, I had to go up every day against guys that weighed 325, 300-something pounds. That's every day. And then you got to go on game day. So, I know what it was like to be prepared. You have to be prepared for it. And like I said, the fundamentals and the techniques I learned from Coach Lloyd, my high school coach. And, I have a great deal of respect. I love that man just like a father to me. I have a lot of respect. You know what, Nick? Actually, I have respect for all the coaches that I played for, because I learned it. You got to respect your elders. Respect was really important as I grew up as a kid. My mother and father always taught me, you got to respect your elders. Although you might disagree with them, you still have to respect them. So I tried to pass that on to my kids and any kids I talk to. So
that's great advice right there, Jerry. And I really think respect your elders is something that we learned. I'm near 61 years old myself here, Jerry, and those are things that are old school things that we have to we have to bring those values to the younger kids these days, because respecting your elders is important. And your parents did a fine job with you, Jerry. You're an excellent human being, and every time I've ever talked with you, I've always been impressed with everything that you've said. And I want to get into a little bit about your football career here. We're talking a lot about the Golden State Warriors, and I told you before, this whole comeback thing was ignited by the Golden State Warriors comeback on Mother's Day. But it reminded me, and I've been very lucky and fortunate to be able to witness a lot of great NFL comebacks. And obviously, I'm going to start with the Super Bowl, where the New England Patriots came back from a 25-point third-quarter deficit that had never been overcome, 25 points in a Super Bowl, came back against the Atlanta Falcons, tied the game at the end of the regulation, and in overtime got the football, went right down the field, got a touchdown, and scored 31 consecutive points and defeated the Atlanta Falcons in Super Bowl 51. And that game right there, Jerry, was a perfect example of you cannot make a great comeback without having the other team collapse. And there was so many things in that Super Bowl that Atlanta did that basically they collapsed. Their coaching was making poor decisions. Their offense was not continuing to control the ball. They weren't running it. They were trying to pass. Their defense got tired. They couldn't stop. But more importantly, I believe that comebacks like that are the most exciting games for a viewer to witness. I can remember a lot of these comebacks, and they're so exciting, Jerry. And, I was fortunate when I was a young man. I was a big San Francisco 49er fan. That was my team growing up. And I was a San Francisco 49er fan, Jerry, because my dad loved the 49ers. And sure enough, in 1980, the San Francisco 49ers pulled off the greatest comeback in NFL regular season history. And I remember it like it was yesterday. Bill Walsh had just taken over the team. Joe Montana was the quarterback. The 49ers had played a horrible first half. They were down 35-7 to the New Orleans Saints. And like you say, Jerry, if that's your team, you got to stick around. You got to watch the game. And sure enough, I was pretty disappointed. I remember I was just a young man then, and I was pretty disappointed. But my dad said, "No, you know what? We're going to watch the game till the end of the game. There's no stopping with that. It's what is it? 60-minute game, Jerry. We're not stopping until." I said, "Okay, Dad, whatever." Okay, and sure enough, the 49ers mounted a comeback, and they were able to overcome the 28-point deficit and tie the game at the end of regulation. And in overtime, at that point in time, Jerry, it was just the first team to score. And sure enough, the San Francisco 49ers got a 36-yard field goal from Ray Wersching, and they came from behind to defeat the New Orleans Saints 38-35, overcoming that 28-point deficit. And that's the largest deficit in a regular season game overcome. And I just thought, my gosh, my dad was right. And I'm going to tell you, I'll never forget my dad. He was just like so excited and so happy. He was just like he had a rooster walk going around the house that day. He was so happy. Yeah, that rooster walk. You know what I mean? Anyway, Jerry, yeah. I know this. You had an incredible game that was a similar. Maybe it wasn't a comeback for your team, but it was a game for the ages for you. And it was when you were playing for UCLA Bruins, and you were playing your arch rivals, the USC Trojans. And I bet it was probably in the Rose Bowl. Is that correct? Was that game?
Back in the day, no. We weren't in the Rose Bowl. No, it was the Pac-8. It was during the time it was the Pac-8. Matter of fact, it just probably became the Pac-10. But no, we had to, in order to play in the Rose Bowl, you had to win the conference.
Okay.
Now they play in the Rose Bowl all the time. But though, it was the winner of that game was going to be playing in the Rose Bowl, and we were playing USC, and I believe it was Marcus Allen, or it might have been Charles White. It doesn't matter. One of them Heisman Trophy winning running backs was on their team. Anyway, we were ahead, and I just remember that last drive that they had, and it came down to field goal situation. If they hit the field goal, they win. If they miss it, they lose, and we win. And I just remember watching it like it was in slow motion. And that field goal kicker, boom, the ball leaves, and all of a sudden it's traveling. It looks like it might fade out to the left, and all of a sudden the ball goes through the uprights. We lose the game, lose the opportunity to go to Rose Bowl. And so they came back on us. We had a lead, and they came back on us. But I just remember that night I was just so exhausted. I had like 28 tackles, and I felt like I was going to die. I'd never experienced anything, lightheadedness. I wound up going to the hospital, had to get an IV and all that kind of stuff. So, we lost. They came back, they won. But, I gave everything that I had. It just wasn't enough. But I do remember being on that end of it.
Well, I think that's great advice right there for any player that's playing in any sport. Give all you've got. Leave it all on the field. And that game you absolutely did, Jerry. You had 28 tackles. And the running backs for USC, they've been good. USC's never had a bad running back, okay? They've made that's how they've made the name for that Trojan program there. You mentioned too Charles White and
Marcus.
Yeah, Marcus Allen. Those guys are great running backs, okay? So either one of them that you were tackling, Jerry, I'm sure by the end of the day you were pretty tired, okay? And 28 tackles, you don't see that many tackles being made anymore. If you look at the stat line, guys are lucky if they're getting 10 tackles a game these days, Jerry. They're just not that involved like they were back in the day when you were dominating UCLA Bruin football. But, Jerry, I would believe you and I both witnessed this playoff game. We just mentioned the greatest comeback ever in a regular season game. And I think you and I both got to witness this game. And it was a game for the ages. I'll never forget this game because I was a big Houston Oilers fan. I wasn't a real big LA Raiders fan. I got to be honest with you. At that point in time, the LA Raiders, they had moved away from here, and I was more of a 49er fan. But my team in the AFC at that point in time was the Houston Oilers, and I really liked the Houston Oilers. I liked their quarterback, Warren Moon. He had come from the Canadian Football League, and they had their coach, Owe Bum Phillips. They just had a lot of personality on that team. And sure enough, on January 3rd, 1993, they were playing the Buffalo Bills, and they had mounted a huge lead over the Bills. And I thought, okay, this is great. Houston's going to win a playoff game and move forward. But the Buffalo Bills said, no, not so fast there, young man, okay? And they were down by 32 points in that game, and the Buffalo Bills battled back, tied the game in regulation, kicked a field goal in overtime, and came back to defeat the Houston Oilers 41-38, and they overcame a 32-point deficit in that game. Do you remember that game, Jerry? Because I can tell you this. I remember it like it was yesterday. It was just an unbelievable. And you talk about a collapse. Houston did everything they could do to collapse in that game. Fumbles. Their offense could not do anything. Do you have any recollection of that game?
Oh, yeah. I have fond recollections of that game right there because it was during the time where we were Los Angeles. Art Shell was our coach, and we were on a roll. We were beating people, and the situation was this: we had just won our game and won everything, and we were waiting to see who we were going to play in the AFC Championship game to go to the Super Bowl. So we're at our after the game, you have your team dinner where the families get to come and the babies and get to run around, and it's nothing but family and friends, and you just have a good time. So we're all glued to the tube because we're done now. That game you're talking about is on, and it was like, oh, wow, man, we headed to Houston. Cool. Love You Blue and Warren Moon and I, we go back because, he played in the Pac-8 too when he was with the Washington Huskies. So, we were friends and this and that. So they were killing them. They were killing Buffalo. I said, well, I really don't want to go to Buffalo in January anyway. So then all of a sudden, as you said, Buffalo mounted this comeback, and next thing you know is overtime and field goal, and damn, we're headed to shuffle off to Buffalo. And that cold weather for the AFC Championship game. And what happened was they put a whipping on us that was just unbelievable. They were on a roll. They took the momentum that they gained from beating Houston, they just carried it over to the next week, man, and they put a beat down on us too. So yeah, I do recall that. Yes, I have fond recollections of that.
Jerry, I hated to bring that up because I knew
no, you
what
didn't.
I knew what happened.
No, I know you already said you didn't like the Raiders. She said, "Yeah, I'm gonna lay this one on Jerry right here. Let's see how well he sleeps tonight."
No,
okay,
Jerry. I knew it would be good. I know it'd be good radio. Okay, so I had to bring it up. But
yeah, okay, all right, thanks.
Jerry, listen. I can tell you this: a lot of these great comebacks happen in the hometown, in the home stadium, because you mentioned the word, and you've said it several times throughout this podcast, momentum. Momentum, I don't think a lot of people understand how important momentum is in a contest, in a ball game. It is so important. We've seen it in basketball where the Warriors, they get that Oracle crowd there at the Oracle Arena just starts screaming and yelling. And we've seen it in every football game in the NFL now, the home field advantage. It is really hard to mount a great comeback when you're the visiting team because the momentum is hard to keep. And I'm thinking about a lot of these games here that we've talked about. The 49ers were at home against the Saints. The Golden State Warriors, their first game was in San Antonio, but they were able to come back in that game. Their Mother's Day game, they were at home at Oracle. The Super Bowl, that was kind of a meaty, that's really nobody has a home field advantage there. But is the home field advantage important to get momentum, or do you think the momentum builds from within the team?
It's from within the team. It does make a huge difference, especially if you're home, because your crowd base, the fan base, they get into it. And, I always say, man, there's nothing more valuable than adrenaline. A shot of adrenaline will take you a long ways, man, take you further than anything. I mean, it's better than sex, Adrenaline will last a lot longer.
Hey,
Here you
Dave,
go.
Dave,
Anyway,
Pete-
y'all think about that. What?
Dave just looked up and said, "What, Jerry?"
Well, think about it for a minute. You get that adrenaline to carry you through a lot of things. And home field advantage, there is an advantage because if there's a momentum shift, if the momentum needs to be, if you get it in your favor, you got your crowd coming and that loud, they're screaming your name and they're spelling out the name of your team. And then, like I was playing for the Los Angeles Raiders. I mean, we had things going on where people from the opposing team that were sitting in the stands with the wrong jerseys on, they were getting beat up, beat down in the Coliseum. And you talk about a momentum shift. I don't know when the fans are getting into it, but I'm just saying home field makes a huge difference. But that momentum part of it, though, I mean, you feel it as a ball player. You know when things are starting to change. You know it because all of a sudden you're either getting the calls that you weren't getting before, or you're making the catches or the blocks, or you're making the tackles, or a big play occurs where there's a turnover, or if your offense, all of a sudden the DB slips down and fall and you guys score a touchdown. There's a lot of things that lead up to that momentum. And then you start believing. All you need is a couple things to happen to change in your direction. And then you start believing again. So, you know what, we're not out of this. And all we need is one more of this, one more of that. And a lot of times it does happen. So momentum is awesome. I mean, it's something that it's hard to describe, but it is for real. It really is because you can see that. For instance, Nick, I mean, you're talking about the Super Bowl, just the past Super Bowl with the Atlanta and New England. I mean, New England, they
got momentum. Yeah, they got that momentum rolling, didn't they, Jerry?
Well, not only did they get that momentum rolling, on the flip side of that coin, when you are ahead in any game, especially a Super Bowl, and your team has never won a Super Bowl before, speaking of the Atlanta Falcons, and you have such a lead, the most important thing, your best friend, is the clock. Your clock. You need to keep that clock moving because, trust me, I've been on the other side when we've been behind, and it's like, okay, we know defense, we got to get a stop. We got to go 3 plays and out, okay? And you're hoping that they don't throw the ball because every time the darn ball's thrown,
the clock stops.
Incomplete pass. It stops. So, Atlanta, maybe the inexperience of being in a Super Bowl. They've been in one or at least one prior to that.
Yes.
And, as far as I'm concerned, they just did a poor job of clock management because they had that game when there was no way because New England sitting over there talking about, God, I hope we get another chance. And wow, all of a sudden, bang, they get the ball back. They gave them more opportunities. You cannot give Tom Brady and Bill Belichick that many opportunities. They've been in far too many Super Bowls for that to happen, and they've won so many games. And Atlanta just fed right into them. They just served it up a little bit at a time. And
Jerry, you're spot on there. Hey, you're spot on because that's exactly where their collapse came in. You cannot make an incredible comeback if you don't have the other teams that's making a lot of poor decisions. And there was so many poor decisions made by the Atlanta Falcons coaching staff. Their offensive line was not blocking. They were not producing any kind of running game. It was a collapse. And in every one of these historical comebacks that we've talked about, they've been aided by the team that their opponent that they're playing because they did not continue to be successful. I mean, they were successful. Every one of these teams was successful in the first half. Or maybe even further. But they stopped becoming successful and they collapsed. They did not continue to score points. They didn't play defense. Their coaching decisions were bad. But that's what's so fun about sports. And that's why I love incredible comebacks. And that's what ignited my whole passion for this comebacks and collapse thing because I've got to witness several of them, and I want to mention this last one before I let you go here, Jerry. And it was a baseball game. Baseball was my number one passion growing up, and I played baseball for several years. Went to 4 years of played baseball in college for 4 years, and so I was a big baseball fan and still am. And I'll never forget this game because they used to have the game of the week on Saturday afternoons on Fox. It was back then it was KTVU here in the Bay Area, but and the game of the week on August 12th, 2008 was the Texas Rangers and the Boston Red Sox. And you know what? I wasn't a real big American League fan, but I always enjoyed to watch the Boston Red Sox, Jerry, because they have that little small park with that big, tall fence out in left field, the Green Monster. And I always thought, wow, that would have been really fun to play there. You hit a high pop-up to left field, and it can be a home run, Jerry. You know what I mean? But if you hit a screaming line drive, it hits off the wall and comes back. You're lucky if you can get a double off of it, you know? It was just a unique park, Jerry, and I enjoyed watching any game I could at Boston. So anyway, that day was the game of the week, and I was all ready for a good ball game. And wouldn't you know, in the bottom of the first inning, the game was already out of hand. Boston scored 10 runs in the very first inning. So after one inning of the game, it was 10-0 over the Texas Rangers. And I thought, oh boy, okay, is this going to be a game I really want to sit around and watch? I mean, the first inning itself took I'm going to say near an hour, Jerry, okay? To score 10 runs, they batted around and it was just unbelievable. But Texas didn't give up, Jerry. They came up in the top of the second inning. They scored 2 runs, so it was now 10-2. Boston came back up in the bottom of the second, and they were hitting the hide off the ball that day, and they scored 2 more runs. So again now there's a 10-run deficit for Texas, and it's 12-2 going into the third inning. And I'm thinking, oh boy, this is going to be a real shellacking. But you know what? Give credit to the Texas Rangers, and this is why you play the game. You play 9 innings. You play 60 minutes in football. You play 48 minutes in basketball. You got to finish the game. And sure enough, the Texas Rangers, they put on a furious comeback. They scored, in the 5th inning, they scored 8 runs to tighten the game. In the 6th inning, they come back up and they score 5 runs. And now they take the lead. Going into the bottom of the 8th inning, the Texas Rangers have come all the way back and now lead the Boston Red Sox. And this game now has gone on for 4 hours, Jerry, and I'm in heaven right now. I can never forget it. My mom's all, geez, are you still watching the ball game? I said, Mom, you'll never believe this game, okay? So anyway, going into the bottom of the 8th inning, the Rangers had taken a 16-15 lead. And I'm thinking to myself, has a team ever overcome 2 10-run deficits in a ball game? And then I'm thinking to myself, wow, has a team ever let 2 10-run deficits get away? You know what I mean? So
Right.
Sure enough, the Boston Red Sox, they were thinking about it too and said, hey, guys, we cannot let this go down. They ended up scoring 4 runs in the bottom of the 8th inning to take a 19-16 lead, and the Texas Rangers didn't go down without a fight. They came back in the 9th inning, in the top of the 9th. They were down 19-16. They battled, got 1 run, had some runners on base, but the game ended with the final score, the Boston Red Sox 19 and the Texas Rangers 17. And that game probably was one of the greatest baseball games I ever witnessed, where you had one team come back from 2 10-run deficits and ended up just a little short, Jerry. So anyway, Jerry.
You know what though, Nick? Though that's what makes it exciting. Seriously, I mean, teams are battling back and forth. I mean, to me, that's what sports is about. And never count anybody out. I mean, whether you're watching it or you're participating, and you're not out until it's over. In those comebacks. You know what, Nick? I thought about something, man. I was on end of a great comeback. Now that I think about it,
Good.
I was in high school and I was running track. It's called the Fresno Relays. And I was on the mile relay team, so I had to run my quarter mile.
Each
So
guy
I was
has
the
to run.
third-
Each guy has to run 1 full lap around the track, Jerry. That's tough, huh?
Yes, and I wasn't the anchor. I was the third leg of it. As I get the baton, we are in dead last. Matter of fact, we were in dead last when the baton was handed to me. All I could see was the backside of the dude that was in front of me. He must have been about 10, maybe 10 yards, 5 to 10 yards in front of me. And so I get the baton, and I'm running. And I get into the first turn down the backstretch. I said, I need to make up a little bit of room. And I just got into this flow, into this zone. And I said, you know what? I made up a little bit of distance. And I came out of that last turn coming home, and I always ran the 220, and that's when I went to the state track meet in. Actually, was running in the 220. So I like to run that curve. So as we came out of the curve in front of the grandstands, right there in front of everybody, I had caught. I went from the back to the front. I caught every single body, and I passed them. And as I handed off the baton to the anchor man, we were in first place. So for me, that was the biggest comeback that that stands out in my mind for a couple reasons, because it was exciting. I remember the crowd getting excited. And then later on, as I went to UCLA my freshman year, the woman that I wound up marrying was telling me she was from Merced, which is by Fresno, and she said, I remember being at a track meet, and there was some brothers from a little small hick town called Santa Rosa called Cardinal Newman High Schools. And she said, and I was telling her this story, and she said, I remember when you came around the corner, the stands just jumped up and got excited because, it just looked awesome as you were just snatching and catching everybody. And make a long story short, the girl at the track meet I wound up marrying.
Oh.
And to me, I know this is a second of a story, and that was the biggest comeback for me in my entire history in playing football, basketball, track, man. It was that track meet at the Fresno Relay. It just so happened to be that my future wife was there. We're no longer married, but still, what a story. I think I put that in the book.
Jerry, I used to watch a lot of track meets, a lot. I used to enjoy watching the mile race was my favorite because you had a lot of guys that could come back like that in the last lap. But I know this, Jerry. Yep. I wasn't a big track guy, okay? I just didn't have that kind of speed. And I played baseball. Baseball and track were at the same time. So they you couldn't do both back in the day. But I can tell you this, Jerry. I know running full speed, one lap around the track, it is a burner. Your lungs are burning. Your legs are done. So for you to be the 220 record setter at Cardinal Newman High School, that you still hold the record there, I believe, and you still hold the record for the 100 there, for you to extend the 220 into 400s and then to be able to overcome the field, that was probably one of the greatest runs you had ever made in your life. It had to be, Jerry, because that was pretty special, I'm sure of it. I would have loved to have seen that.
Nick, you know what? Nick, it was, man. It just, and talking about it and hearing you describe about how grueling it was, I'm still tired now, man. All right,
Jay, and not only that, Jerry, you won your wife's heart, okay? You won your wife's heart on that race. And, if you would have been the guy from Santa Rosa, the little school from Cardinal Newman that, came in last place in the track meet, your wife may have not have fallen in love with you. So great story, Jerry. Listen, it's great when a guy opens up his heart like that. You just did that. You did it with several different stories today, and I got to tell you, I really enjoy all of your stories, Jerry Robinson. You're a very special man, a great athlete, the greatest of all time here in Sonoma County. And I just want to tell you, I cannot wait till our next podcast together or have you on Overtime with Nick and Bob, because I know the listeners are they love listening to your stories as much as I do. I know Dave Perkins in here as producer. He loves it. I want to thank you so much for joining us today on the 10th inning.
Hey, my pleasure. My pleasure. And D. Perkins, hey, you guys, it's been a pleasure once again, and I'm looking forward to the next time. All right? Go Warriors.
All right, Jerry. You have a good night. I want to thank our listeners for joining us each week here on the podcast, the 10th inning with Nick Mattos, and my producer, Dave Perkins. Really appreciate being able to come in the Lethal Weapon 2 studios. Keep your eye out. The 10th inning with Nick Mattos will be back in 2 weeks. And don't forget to join us on my Facebook page, Overtime with Nick and Bob. Thank you very much, and good night.